I would like to welcome you all. We have a very exciting panel discussion today on overcoming practical challenges in implementing LLMs across industries. I am Christina. I'm a visiting researcher at Cedar Islands. I'm so thrilled to have you join here today. Alongside with me is my colleague Kilin, who will be supporting us throughout the session. And yeah, together we look forward to exploring the complexities and opportunities that come with integrating large language models into diverse industries. Before we dive right into the topic, I would like to encourage you to stay until the end of this webinar for our Q&A session. This will be your chance to ask questions and to open up your mics. Of course, you're also welcome to share your questions at any point using the chat box throughout the session. And Yelin and myself, we will make sure that they are collected and we will ask them on your behalf. Just a quick note, please note that this event is being recorded and the recording, along with any supplementary materials, will be shared as a follow-up. Keep this in mind while asking questions and comments. They may become part of the public recording. Also, another quick note, today's discussion is part of CEDAR's Lighthouse Projects program. And we're thrilled to have assembled a panel of experts to address the practical challenges of implementing LLMs across the industries. So the challenges that we're going to discuss today cover a wide range of socio-technical issues. They will range from leadership to data management to resource allocations to aligning business strategies with AI capabilities. So if these topics excite you, please be sure to also follow us on LinkedIn, Substack, and YouTube for updates on our future discussions, useful articles and resources which come at no cost for you. My colleague Keeling will share the links to these platforms in the chat, and after the discussion, we'll make sure to send them again to you along with some materials about CEDAR and our Lighthouse Projects program. So our goal today is to address LLM implementation challenges head-on with insight from our fantastic panel of experts. I hope you can see them, and I hope you can see their affiliation as well on the screen. I would like to start inviting them now one by one to introduce themselves briefly and as well as their work. And maybe we can start with Saskia. Saskia, the floor is yours, please. Let the participants know more about you.
Yeah, thank you, Christina, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Saskia Lensink. I work at TNO. It's a research and technology organization in the Netherlands. I'm a linguist by training, so you can imagine that the whole world of large language models is very appealing to me. I've been working in language and speech technology for the past couple of years for TNO, mainly as a consultant. And currently also I'm involved in a national initiative, GPTNL, where we're trying to build our own sovereign, independent large language model, which is a very challenging project, to say the very least.
Yeah, it sounds like you will have also some very practical insights for us to hear today, right from the kitchen, of how all of those things that we get to use on a daily basis are implemented in practice. Maybe Amir can now share a few words about himself as well.
Sounds good. You can hear me fine?
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, thanks for having me here. I'm a physicist by training, and I worked on quantum computing a couple of lives ago. And in the past 10 years or so, I have been working in natural language processing in industry. And of course, large language models is a subset of that has become pretty popular in the past few years. So in terms of the types of activities I currently do, I'm the founder of Aggregate Intellect. It's a small AI company based in Toronto. We run a relatively large community of AI researchers and engineers. We have about 5,000 people in our community globally. So we do a lot of community activities, including a lot of educational work on large language models and how to use them. We do maintain an open source library for multi-agent systems. So essentially workflow automation is a very interesting aspect of large language models that we are very interested in. We do work with a lot of businesses to help them implement these kind of technologies inside of their business workflows. And I do advise a number of startups on those kind of topics. And then on the R&D side of things, we are very interested in the economic impact of large language models because of the workflow automation aspects. So with some collaborators at university, at a few different universities, we are developing a theory of work for teams that are hybrid of humans and machines that are going to be a very likely reality sooner than we want to accept, I think. So I'm happy to be here.
We're so happy to have you here, and the perspective, especially, you bring on so many hats. It would be wonderful to hear your perspective. It sounds like you can shed a lot of light on, based on your experience on consulting companies, but also from your own implementations. And automation is definitely something we would like to discuss in this panel as well. Martina, maybe you can also say a few words about yourself.
Yes, sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Martina. I am a research lead in Accenture, big consulting and technology company. I specifically work in a much smaller team, which is called the Human Sciences Studio. We are based in Dublin at the Dockland, and we're based in the Innovation Center. So we are looking at all those technologies, they're, present and will be impacting our clients in the future too. And I think what I bring that is a bit special in the mix is that the Human Sciences Studio is a blended capability of anthropologists, sociologists, psychologists. So we're really bringing the human sciences and kind of the societal impact of technology. So more than the tech side, I'm not a tech specialist. I come from a background of literature, cultural studies, and sociology. But we do understand how people use technology. And so we are really trying to bring that human-centered approach to understanding all new technologies, including, of course, AI and LLMs most recently. So happy to be, joining the conversation.
Yeah, this is so exciting. And we did have a preliminary meeting with you that left me so interested in all of that you have to say. I feel like there is a disconnect between disciplines right now, and we find it hard to communicate with people from different backgrounds. And the study of AI is so interdisciplinary in its nature, actually. So it's amazing to have that human-centered and that socio-technical perspective shared with us today. We're so happy to have you. So maybe I can stop sharing my screen and just so you can we can all see your face while you're speaking. Maybe we can start asking some questions. And the first question that comes to mind, and that I'm pretty sure that most people are going to start with asking you is, what are some challenges that you're currently facing when implementing LLMs, and what are your strategies for overcoming them? Especially maybe Amir can share a little bit more information on that, as he also consults a lot of companies right now. Amir, what are some interesting challenges that you're facing right now when it comes to the implementation?
Definitely. I sort of split it into two broad categories of problems that I see. One broad category is the overexcitement about what large language models are and can do, where we see people come to us and they're like, can this automate my whole life, including these extremely complex business decisions? And so just that, even like that educational work inside the consulting, capacity where you have to say, hey, come down a little, let's just sit down and talk through these, let's talk about what they are, what they can do, what you can do with them reliably. And unfortunately, the social media hype where everybody is doing science fair projects that are very exciting, very interesting at the demo level, but as soon as you're going to take them into production, you're going to face the same type of problems that we have always dealt with in the past, 10, 15 years, where data science has been a thing, where data has to come in from somewhere. It has to come in at a scale. It has to be clean. It has to have the signals you want. And then, these models can sit on top of them. One thing that I see quite a bit is that people really overestimate the reasoning capability of these models, and they hope that I just don't do anything. I'll just write a prompt and the model will do the magic for me, which unfortunately is not available to us yet, except for very trivial problems. And the second category is over skepticism about these things. A lot of people who are like, oh yeah, I don't need to worry about these things. This is another blockchain type hype that is going to go away, etc. That category is fortunately a little smaller these days, because a lot of people are seeing enough examples that they get excited about them. But that still exists, that people, come to it with a very negative point of view. They're like, I have the FOMO, all my colleagues and, counterparts are talking about it. Should I do it as well? But then they're also not curious enough to, try to figure out how to actually effectively use it.
This is such an interesting perspective. I have to say, I didn't expect excitement to come as the first challenge that anyone would share today on this panel. And you're actually so right. It seems like beyond everything else, what we hear about is just the hype, and a lot of people under or overestimate what's the reality of LLMs and what they can actually do for you on a personal level or for you in a business. I'm wondering, Saskia, maybe you would bring a different perspective, or maybe you will surprise me as well and you will agree with all of that. I'm sure all people here are looking forward to hearing what you have to say about this as a person who is directly implementing LLMs on a European level.
Yeah, so indeed, on the one hand, we're trying to develop these models by ourselves and really building them from scratch, such that we are compliant with current legislation, which means no copyright infringements, not just blindly using any copies of the internet, making sure that we're really taking GDPR seriously. But then the biggest challenge that we face is data and the lack thereof. It's really hard to get enough data for just a single project. So can you imagine if you are trying to build or develop a foundation model, which needs massive amounts of data? And that really is the main blocker for us. And on top of that, we really see this excitement that Amir was just referring to, and the expectations that people have of such a clean model. So they come to us and they have high expectations of what such a model built from scratch could potentially do. And they're hoping that it will be like this perfect alternative, this unicorn, this fairy tale almost. And there we really have to set expectations and really do a lot of expectation management, because it's something we also see that as soon as you start to implement even a very powerful commercial model, reality is it's quite hard to implement it well and to know where it adds value and to tune it in such a way and to integrate it in your current processes in such a way that it actually does something that will speed up your processes or make them more efficient or make them more enjoyable even. So that's a real bottleneck. And on top of the challenges that Amir was describing, I would also mention fear for innovation, fear for new things, fear for these new technologies that we don't understand well, or the fear of integrating products that have been developed in the US or China, for example. There is a lot of carefulness and fear around integrating it. So with many of the customers or the potential end users that we talk to, they actually say that they don't trust the models that are developed overseas, and they would like to have a European alternative. But at the same time, well, perhaps these European alternatives will be viable alternatives, very well possible, but people should not stop experimenting and getting experience with these models and really see where are the boundaries and how can I actually implement those? What do I run into? And I I'm very curious to hear what Martina has to say also, because with all the social economic effects and psychological effects, and the change management that you need to go through, that's a real tough cookie. So those are real challenges, and the fear of adopting something new is definitely a big hurdle.
Yeah, definitely. Martina can jump in and just share her perspective on that.
Yes, so what you both are saying, Amir and Saskia, like completely resonates with what we're seeing here with the multitude of clients that come to our office to, get inspired, get educated on this new technology. And adoption, I'd say, it's one of the biggest one that we focus on specifically in helping them from a human perspective, because as you were saying, there's all the data part of it. We look more at the adoption, and I think the challenge and the question that we hear a lot is how can we invest in a technology and make sure that people are going to adopt it? Like, we might be spending a lot of money and then maybe our workforce is not going to want to use it, or we're not going to see the return on investment, or we're not going to see the productivity increase that we're hoping to get. And so how do we get there? And there's no straightforward answer, unfortunately, but there are things, and one way we've been talking about this that I think works nicely with our clients to understand the complexity of the issue is that the same way as these LLMs run on foundation language models, humans, they work on mental models. Like, psychologically, and if there are any psychologists in here by training, they know that we approximate reality. We have images in our mind of what something should look like. So I've never been an astronaut, I've never met one, but I kind of know what an astronaut does, and this comes from the movies I've seen, the book I've read, the people, all the knowledge and things that have encompassed, that have been part of my life. I think the same is well LLMs. A lot of people don't have a technical understanding of that, how they work. A lot of them, maybe think they've never encountered it. Maybe they have, maybe they don't know, but they have an idea which could be very polarized between utopia or dystopia. It could be, this is going to make everything better, and this is going to doom us. And what we see interesting here is trying to really have the leaders coming here understanding that there are polarized mental models of AI out there. There are very, very different views. There are very different feelings and attitudes and knowledge of AI. And so it's going to be really hard to get everybody on board without bringing in the behavioral science, the psychology, to really start to understand how can we move people towards adoption in a way that it is leading to adoption, but it is also respectful of the fears and resistance that people might have, which is not just because the workforce is bad and they don't want to use the tools. There are like genuine reasons why they don't want to. One might be feeling like they will be out of a job. So how do you consider these things? How do you mitigate them? How do you build up a strategy that incorporates adoption, not just as something to think about at the end, but core to your strategy as you start talking about maybe bringing these new technologies into your work?
Amir, before I jump in with that, because I'm a psychologist by training, and when I heard that Martina mentioned mental models, I had like a torrent of thoughts that were provoked by all of that. But I feel like you can jump right in here and just say a few words yourself related to all of that, because you started us off from this human-centered perspective, and maybe now you have more things to add.
Yeah, I mean, I can build on this in the sense of like, it's not just that we see as challenges, again, having different mental models that somehow we have to reconcile when we think especially of big workforces or global workforces. But it's also that oftentimes we see a perception gap between the leadership and the people that have to implement this. So it kind of goes back to what Amir was saying in terms of the hopes and the expectations, and so we hear things like, and we saw that in the media, of productivity is gonna go up of X amount %, everybody will have a co-pilot assistant, we'll be able to optimize and make everybody more efficient. And this is what a lot of leaders are saying, rightfully so, because this is what they hope they could do. But what the workforce will hear some often time, it's what's going to happen to me, what's going to happen to my job, how it's going to change the way that I work, is my job at risk? So I think we are starting to find ways in which we can bring the two together to avoid this gap growing bigger and bigger, because it won't serve, ultimately scaling technologies in organizations. And so we have different mental models, and hopefully I can touch upon specific one as we go through, the conversation. But for us, this is a real one, again, bringing adoption at the center of the conversation, not just an afterthought.
Yeah, we often hear in the media this talk about productivity, almost for the sake of humanity, and people are so tied up in their identity with their jobs, and it's very hard for a professional that has been working in the field for, say, 20-30 years to be told how to almost like do their job. And mental models, they come from things that we know. And what do we know? We know AI from what it has been in the media, which in the European landscape has been a lot of regulations, a lot of fear mongering, almost, because all those regulations are obeyed with very real fears. They're very much tied to a lot of fears about our confidentiality, about bias, about transparency, and then science fiction, dystopian scenarios of robots taking over, and we are becoming like a second race almost. Amir, you wanted to say something? Please go ahead.
Yeah. So what both Saskia and Martina say is very closely tied into the R&D work that we are doing. There are two very, very major challenges. One is on that topic. One is that, as I think Martina sort of alluded to, we don't really have an organizational psychology type of framework for how these types of systems should behave. Like, we don't know how humans are going to respond to half of their colleagues being machines going forward, right? We don't know, are they going to rebel against it? And, the question of adoption and change management necessary for that to go smoothly, that's non-existent. Like, a lot of people started talking about it, but that doesn't exist. So that's one big aspect, like even corporate structures, definitions of jobs, how job is organized. A lot of the systems that we are currently using are just going to be completely useless very soon. So then the question is, what's the right way to go about it? What's the mental model? What's the framework? What's the organizational psychology necessary to facilitate? Like, it's not change management only at, oh, these organizational leaders have to do these things right, but it is also like, you probably have to break everything down to ground and build it up from scratch, because the model has to completely shift, right? So that's one aspect of it. The second aspect of it is very related to what Saskia is saying, which is a lot of the available models are only aligned to human preferences at a very, very superficial level at the moment. They're just learned. They have been fine-tuned to not say bad things, not to teach you bad things, et cetera, and that's just the beginning, right? Like, there's going to be a need for a lot of cultural nuances, a lot of regional nuances, a lot of linguistic and those types of nuances that have to be added. But more importantly, I think also these models are not fine-tuned to facilitate human-human interactions, right? Like, there is some work from DeepMind, for example, that is fine-tuning large language models so that they can say things that two groups of people with opposing points of view can communicate better with each other, right? So now imagine fine-tuning models so that humans can work more effectively with each other, even if they have, a difference of incentives. So there are a lot of very interesting questions that we're just beginning to scratch the surface.
So many things are at interplay here, and also all of you have mentioned in some sense or another the cross-cultural aspect of what it means to start implementing those things in scale. We still are struggling with building cross-cultural things, and now we are adding large language models in the mix. And Saskia mentioned that in terms of us being hesitant on using models that are imported from overseas. Maybe all of us, all of you actually can share a few words on the cross-cultural aspect and what challenges you have mentioned. Saskia, I know that you are building your own European model here. Maybe you can tell us a few words on why Europeans, like from the cross-cultural aspect even, why us Europeans are hesitant on using models imported overseas. Like what are the why is it important to have a model being built on ethically sourced data, and maybe by this we can transition to some of our values and how they relate to the values of other cultures that maybe others have worked on.
Yeah, that's a great question. And to start with, the very interesting realization is that we're already lagging behind more or less with this idea that we need to build our own foundation models in order to get the culture right. So at first, when ChatGPT surfaced, people started trying to break it basically, and then people have been trying to break it ever since, and there's been a lot of red teaming. Same with the Meta's models and all the other models. There's a lot of red teaming going on to see, can we break the model, and can we increase the guardrails? Can we improve the guardrails, I should say, by increasing them, obviously. And can we somehow add certain cultural nuances? We've also seen that these large foundation models have been updated multiple times, and they used to perform quite poorly on some languages, but that seems to increase and improve every single day. So now it's not really a matter of, will, for example, the Dutch language be sufficiently supported by these large language models, which was previously a concern. Now it's more or less the question, how can we make sure that it's adapted to a certain organizational context? And that is something that you cannot necessarily tackle by building your own foundation model. That really takes place, we believe, in the fine-tuning stage, or the further tailor-made, making it specific to your own context. And that is something that is not necessarily done within the foundation model training itself. So it was the initial idea was mainly supported, or the initial initiative was born from the idea that, first of all, we need to do it. We need to learn how to do it by ourselves to get some extra sovereignty. We want to do it ethically and lawfully. But there was also a fourth very important one, and it was the fear that we cannot get culture in otherwise. But that fourth one, that fear, I think, has been taken away by what we've seen nowadays. And we really need to adopt and tailor these models, and that is perfectly possible. It is hard, though. It is difficult to do so. But you will also have to do that if you build your own model, then still you need to add this additional layer of cultural context, etc. So by building it by yourself, you're not going to get there automatically. And that's just a tough lesson that we're learning now.
Wow, this is so profound into I think how we Europeans think about things. And yeah, before I give Martina the word, I would like to say that someone sent me a question. The chat has not been disabled on purpose. There has been some, misconfiguration there. So while my colleague Yulin is trying to figure that out, you can send any questions that come to your minds to me on direct message, and I will make sure to record them. Martina, I know you've been doing a lot of cross-cultural work nowadays. Maybe you can pick up where Saskia left off and just share your thoughts on the cross-cultural aspects here.
Yes, so actually I'm very happy that I can speak about this piece of work, because as you can imagine, a lot of work we do is confidential. And so this one was published this week, the official report. It is a piece of work we have done, my team at Accenture with CARE International, so the CARE UK specifically. And so the idea was to really get together to get a sense from civil society organizations that are doing work in the global south in terms of what would it take to implement a scale AI in general, not just LLMs, but AI, responsibly in those areas. So it was a really nice piece of work. The report is available if anybody wants to hear that. But for us, it was really important to show that, the conversation is being dominated by the global north. But there is a global south that is going to be impacted. They can get a lot of benefits from these technologies. They can also get a lot of harms from these technologies. And so we wanted to talk to, civil society, nonprofit, all those kind of actors that are involved on the ground with those kind of more marginalized, vulnerable communities, to understand what would it take actually to bring AI here and bring it in a way that it's going to make people's lives better. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that, again, I'm not a technologist by training, so I know more the theory of the practice of how foundational model works. But they're meant to be generalizable and universally. Like, this is the gain of having such a huge amount of data gathered from the web, for example. So of course, that clashes with communities that have been underrepresented in, the data pools that are available there. At the same time, the burden of creating those localized, foundation models, it's very like, who's going to take responsibility to do that, and why? And so there is interesting
financing as well.
And where. So the conversation is far from being an easy one. I don't know, Saskia, here I'm going to become a bit of a nerd one, because I've been in academia many years, so unfortunately I like academic papers. But there is a nice paper from Arini Suresh and Emily Tsang that has been published in May this year, which was talking exactly how do we do participatory AI in foundation models. And the idea that they have, again, I don't know how feasible it is to implement those ideas, but the thing was like, the foundation model, if we could add levels like a subfloor, they go with the architecture metaphor. So what if we could add a subfloor and then a surface levels, and actually be able to have people helping us to do that fine tuning to make sure that we are collecting data in a responsible way, that we are taking account people whose English is not their first language, that might have very different cultural understanding of some specific context, And so I think a lot of the idea of participatory AI, it is that has to start to go deeper into the foundation part of it, and not just stay at the, we're going to consult somebody once everything is done, So this was something that was coming, the idea of participatory AI, when we build those foundation models and potentially the architecture above them. It's something that the report emphasizes, and I think it is, ideally one way to move forward, bringing more people into the conversation that might have that cross-cultural understanding that I want to have, just because we have to talk to the people on the ground. And then another thing that I'm not going to touch upon now, but there is also the fact of informed consent. How do you develop that when there might be, services that are needed for you for survival that are dependent on you giving data? So much informed consent can you do when it's either you opt in or you opt in? There's not really opt out from having your data collected. So this is another big thing that I'm going to hold for the moment there.
Yeah. Amir, maybe, you want to jump in once again? Or, yeah, Saskia actually opened her mic. Maybe she wants to go ahead first.
Yeah, just to quickly react to some things that you're saying. And indeed, I really like this idea of participatory AI, and I agree it should go further than just in this fine-tuning stage or guardrailing stage. And what we do notice is, because it's quite new and it's hard to do, it's the first thing you skip in terms of priorities. So once you try to develop your own foundation model, you kind of realize that there are a lot of things you need to take care of. And it's really hard to get responsible AI practices in place and to use a framework and to know what to do. It's a real tough challenge. And we have a lot of discussions on, so how representative can we make this data set, and what should we strive for? And we cannot get it perfect, but how much should we try, and how can we reduce bias? Can we mitigate bias, and what is good enough? That's a really tough challenge. And for us, of course, we only have a very narrow view of representation, because we only look at a model that will be used in the Netherlands, and it's mostly focused on the Dutch language, which has certain dialects, but then still it's the Dutch language. And you're absolutely right that the global south is underrepresented in any data set, which is a challenge. But we already see it in some of the Horizon projects that we're working on, where, for example, we're working on a model that's called Trust LLM, and there we collaborate with different countries where a Germanic language is spoken. And so we have Iceland on board, but also the Faroese Islands. And those languages are very underrepresented in most language data sets. And what we now see is in our first models is that those languages are now also suddenly included and seem to perform better than in the commercially available models. So that's already a big step forward, but then you start to realize, well, there's over 6,000 languages, and then you don't even count the dialects. So how to tackle that? There is definitely a real large focus on majority languages, and then maybe some minority languages, but those are mostly from the global north. That's definitely a challenge that we cannot just tackle. And participatory AI is another way, but it won't just bring you the data, but also different points of view. And it's a real struggle for us to integrate that well. So I guess we really got to try with each other and come up with new methods and ways to really make it a core practice.
Definitely. Amir, did you want to say something on top of that, or?
Well, I don't really have as much exposure as Saskia and Martina has on the cultural aspect, so I won't say much more there. But I do see a lot of parallels between what they're talking about and what I see in cross-profession nuances. Because, you know, very, very similarly, like if you're working with people in construction type of businesses, the language they use, the way they do their work, the mentality they have about the value of their work and the nuances of it and all of that is like very different. Of course, not as different as it would be in, when we are going across the borders of countries and cultures, but, still pretty similar. And one thing that I would add to what they said, everything they said is very important, that you have to collect a lot of high quality data, train models, etc. But I think one thing that is not talked about enough, that is sort of my bread and butter to talk about, is systems level thinking, which I think they implied, but I think we should just really go back and think about that, right? Like, how does a model interact with its environment? And that environment is not necessarily only humans, it is also other models, it is also other types of data sources, and how do all of these work together to achieve an objective that we have? And I think there is also, like, going back to my overexcitement comment, there's also a lot of overemphasis on getting one model that does everything, instead of thinking, okay, this model is really good at X, but it is really bad at Y. So why don't we train a small model that is good at Y and figure out how these two can talk to each other? How can 5 different models interface with each other to cover all of the nuances, to have the robustness of the diversity of the abilities and the skills that these models have to achieve the objectives that we have at the system level, not at the model level. That's the only thing that I would add to what they said.
Yeah, and your only thing that you want to add is actually a very astute observation, that we're trying to address so many levels of. So we have cross-cultural aspect. We have the culture, the organizational culture, which is yet another culture that we need to discuss and in this panel as well. And we have to take all of this into account, and we approach it with the mindset that one model is able to do it all. It's just, of course, not possible, and participatory design is maybe a good step towards trying to solve this issue. There are two things that I want to approach right now. So one of them is a discussion about regulations, which is happening in the chat. But maybe as we are on the topic of cultures and organizations and different types of industries, maybe we can start by discussing a little bit um, what's what the role of leadership is in all of that. So how can leaders in certain climates approach this, in certain climates, sorry, in certain industries approach this, and how they can support this transition to happen? And another thing is about the industries themselves. Do you believe that there are industries that are better prepared than other industries, and why that is? And then we can check what the guys in the chat have come to in terms of discussion, and maybe we can jump in on that as well. So yeah, maybe Martina can start us off on that. What is the role of leadership, do you think, and what sort of industries are better set off at the moment? Maybe why is that?
Yes. So, I mean, of course, leadership has a big role, and part of it we touched upon at the beginning. It's trying to, lessen that perception gap. It's really, getting attuned with what the workers want and need. On top of course, their, agenda, growth priorities, and optimization that this technology will necessarily bring. So it is about uh, considering both the people and the business aspect of it. And I think everybody kind of gets there. It just sometimes and I saw that there is a nice question about bringing human-centered design and human-centered aspect to that. That might be just something that needs to get a bit closer to leaders so that they can adopt that system view. I really like that, Amir. This is something we also try to do a lot. We do a lot of systems mapping to try to really show them organizations are systems. They're embedded in bigger systems, which are the societies and the communities in which this technology is deployed. So really trying to get to some kind of systems and long-term thinking also. So the balancing out of the short-term gains with the long-term view, whether that's again human impact or just business growth. So leadership definitely has a lot to do, and to respond to what Saskia was saying, a lot of these things are moving fast. So it's not like there is not a willingness to do responsible practices or to do what's best for everybody. It's just that it's complicated and it's fast moving, and so there's no training for that, in the sense of like you need to get up at speed with technologies that were not around even 5 years ago and will maybe be completely different in 5 years in certain ways. So it's definitely a challenging role to be in as a leader right now, to have to make all those decisions, while regulations are also evolving alongside. One thing that I would like to say, because I think it's a really interesting way of how important it is to have conversations that are either by industry or by functions, but I think the real interesting things happen when you start to look at smaller bits instead of LLM. How do you scale it? Every single organization, every single business will have their own needs and implementation and processes. For example, we've been working a lot right now with really in healthcare, for example, with really people that have had like I can refer one work. This again, it was published a couple of years ago, but we supported in a Horizon project, a European Horizon project, to develop an AI system for oncologists that would help them, predict potential relapse for cancer patients. So of course, this is technology for good impact. This is something we want to get it right. This is something oncologists want to get to help them better do their job. But then as you start developing the tool, the technical infrastructure, the UX aspect of it. How are you going to make it interact with those oncologists? You start to get into the understanding that what this specific cohort of people needs from this AI tool is not what I could need in my day-to-day life. There were some, really interesting and very, specialized consideration in terms of explainability, And again, I saw something in the comment about using chatbots for healthcare. An oncologist will not trust an AI prediction just because it's an AI prediction. They will want to know, why is that so? How did you got there? What else didn't you tell me that I might need to consider to make my informed decision? So, the first step, even for us, for everybody, was let's do the tool, let's test it with people. And then we have to really go back and think, these are people that have 20, 30 years of experience. Their careers will depend on these tools, not just being useful, but being accurate and really giving them what they need to make decisions about, really sensitive impact that it could potentially have. So I think the nice things start to happen when you start to go deep into an industry and understanding what would Martina, a researcher, knowledge worker, need compared to an oncologist in a research institute, for example. So this is when you start to see how leadership will need to be really considering of those specific use cases rather than just going for, we're going to make everybody more productive, because I don't think, that works up to a certain extent.
Yeah, definitely. Saskia, do you have something to add to that maybe about the role of leadership and about industry preparedness?
Yeah, well, I can imagine for leadership, it's quite tough, especially also because for most of them, generative AI or all these innovations are very unknown and something they don't really touch, and they're not really in touch with. It's quite interesting to see that oftentimes the boardroom is a bit more, is a bit further away from what is happening with these tools and these developments than people on the work floor. We had this very humbling experience where we gave a short workshop on generative AI for our co-workers, our colleagues, and it's all scientists, right? So we were just like all brainstorming and what could we potentially do and making it very complicated. And then the secretary of that department actually raised her hand and said, well, I'm already using it for many months. It's really helping me. I'm using it for this. I'm using it to translate, to draft my emails, to fact check, to make sure it's tailor-made to certain audiences. Like, she was listing this whole set of things and also had a pretty clear idea on how it helped her in her work. And everyone was just like, oh, wait a second. They were just still, so what is exactly a button we need to press? Well, it's a bit, of course, it's more nuanced than that, but that was kind of the impression we got, like, oh, wait a minute. People that are actually working and try to do their work as efficient and make it as fun as possible are already experimenting a lot. So leadership should also really sit down with people and really listen and see what the experiences are and not be too afraid to adopt all these technologies. Because yes, on the one hand, it's not all about productivity, but on the other hand, we're not productive enough in Europe. And there is a lot of developments going on in the rest of the world, and we cannot stay behind. Well, that's what you always hear, but it is true to a certain extent that if we do not increase our productivity, we will have a tough challenge to compete with the rest of the world because certain expectations will be raised. So that's something that is really important for leaders, especially if you're a leader in the European context, to take into account. And I also don't envy their position because indeed we are very good at regulating things in Europe. And it's really complex and it's a moving target. And it's not really clear how it will pan out. And all these uncertainties also create fear, being careful, being a bit conservative in what you do want to integrate and do want to use. So I can imagine for leadership, they perhaps prefer to mitigate risks by not integrating and allowing for too much innovation too soon. However, we should really consider the risk of not integrating it and lagging behind. So it's a tough challenge. And especially if you have multiple markets all across the world, then where are you going to release your new products? The regulatory landscape in Europe is really fragmented and complex. So perhaps you're more prone to release your products in another part of the world. So that is really something we need to consider. And that leadership needs to consider as well. How do we cope with that? And also, all these new products, they need to run on huge cloud infrastructures, which need a lot of electricity. That is really an aspect that we need to keep in mind, because costs for this cloud infrastructure might skyrocket in the future, especially if we have certain very strict regulations. That will be a business model for cloud providers. If you have a stricter set of regulations, then there will, at some point, the market will come up with a nice alternative for you, but there will be an additional pricing on top of that. And if we are very much reliant on these new technologies, then the pricing of that and the costs will be really challenging. So these are things that I think leaders are hopefully already worrying about.
I'm certain they do. And, you know, being a leader nowadays means that you have to juggle a lot of, you know, I would assume, you know, a lot of responsibilities, from price, financing, markets that you're going to approach, different teams in your organization, because those have a different set of cultures as well. So we have this multi-layered approach to cultural integration. Even within one organization, different teams might have different cultures. And then there's also, of course, the ethical aspects in terms of sustainability of all of these things, because as you said, and our team is very interested in sustainability, especially this season of the Lighthouse Projects program. It's a lot of things that a leader nowadays has to juggle in terms of that. Amir, do you have maybe anything to add to that? You are a founder of Aggregate. I think I imagine that you have faced head on a lot of those challenges yourself.
Yeah, I think to complement what is already said, I have to put my regulation skeptic hat on, because you know, I know we are talking about regulation and how it can protect us and how leaders have to do things to you know, help us transition more safely and all of that. But let's be honest, it is 15 years later and we are still talking about data privacy rules and regulations, right? And in the context of North and Europe is a little more organized around the topic. Look at North America, right? Look at the countries in the Eastern Bloc, right? So I'm of the belief that relying on the top-down approaches to keep us safe and successful, and you know, as one of the questions in the chat or QA said, not become completely irrelevant very quickly, is to also look at bottom-up approaches and grassroots approaches, right? Like one of the things that was said in the chat is, you know, what's the role of investors? What's the role of venture capital in all of this, right? I have an example from a domain that I usually use in this conversation, that is climate change. Like, how many years has it been where we have been trying to figure out how to regulate, you know, all the industries and activities that result in bad climate change, right? And no success there, let's be honest. While at the same time, there are so many entrepreneurs out there who have figured out that if I align the values of clean technology with the venture capital values, it's the best of both worlds. And the reason that these kind of entrepreneurs exist is that there's a venture capital variety out there that, you know, cares about green technology and is investing in green technology. And at the same time, the entrepreneur is not saying, hey, invest in this because this is the good thing to do. They're saying, hey, you can make a lot of money, but at the same time, you're also going to process all of this waste differently, or you're going to do this type of monitoring to reduce waste, or do this or do that. So sort of like acknowledging what is happening in the world and aligning ourselves with enabling grassroots movements that can address some of these issues around privacy, around data usage, around, power. Power is going to be a huge one, as Saskia said. Like, you're going to run into power, bottlenecks very, very quickly. So, all of these things, I think the role of leaders becomes, how do you allow people to experiment, try things, and empower them, as an investor, as, an organizational leader? How do you empower the grassroots movements to create productive outcomes and, initiatives and products that will actually address the concerns that we have that are very, very valid, but the hope that governments are going to do something about it, in my opinion, is completely misplaced.
Yeah, I just really want to react to it, because I think, yes, these rules and regulations, I'm getting more and more skeptical, because now I see what they lead to, namely, we're hitting the brakes, we're scared to innovate, we're afraid that we might be fined, we don't want to cross any rules, break any rules, no cross any borders. It's really stifling innovation at some point. So there is definitely a downside to it, and it seems to be the case, and that's what we are starting to feel a bit more at the moment, is that we've created a lot of rules that are intended to protect Europe and European citizens, but they seem to be harming us now, because we're starting to lag behind and become more and more irrelevant. That's a general feeling that people start to get, but that is something we need to address. And also, if we really think that our ideals are so important to us, which I think is a really great thing, we also need to be realistic and pragmatic, because in order to realize all these values and ideals that we have, you need money to pay for it. If you don't have a strong economy, you cannot live up to your values. You cannot realize all these ethical directions that you would like to take. I think it's also a very ethical thing to grow your economy and make sure that everybody is having a life the way you would like them to have it. And that's also a responsibility we should take.
That's an amazing point. And this has been going on in the chat as a conversation as well. But in Europe, leaders feel so much pressure to enhance productivity, to stay competitive globally, but the regulatory environment right now is so fragmented, and it's so how should I say, stringent, maybe is the word, and markets tend to become very cautious, conservative, and adopting like new technologies starts to be something that's in the back of their minds almost. So maybe a follow-up question on that is how do we remain flexible in the face of like that regulatory change? How do we maintain this balance between the need of the market, the need of the investors, the need of like, I know that this is a very hard question to answer, and especially within the time frame, and as only we're not going to be able to solve that. But I would like to hear your input on like just how do you approach this in your daily work? How do you what do you do to remain as flexible as possible? What's the dialogue within your organization in terms of how you balance things out? How do you approach your teams internally also to adopt this mindset? Maybe Martina can start with that, and then the rest can jump in.
Yes. So definitely, I can tell you that flexibility is something we can build in. When it comes to regulations, there isn't much that could be done. As Saskia was saying, they're pretty stringent. So what we try to do as much as possible is sandboxes, small pilots, like try to operate, get people familiar with the technology, understand exactly how it's going to work, in your organization, how it's going to serve your specific, users internally. So it is the sense of trying to create safe spaces for experimentation. Something we've also seen happening is just people getting so excited by especially the open source, the chat GPTs of the world, and they go there and they start using them, maybe putting stuff there they shouldn't because it's, confidential information. So people want to use them. You have to create safe spaces for them to, to play with the tool, understand how it works, understand how it can benefit from you, put the right guardrails in place, maybe start to really understand when is the cost, benefit of them, really going down to, how productivity manifests. So I agree with you, Saskia, productivity needs to go up and will go up thanks to this tool if implemented. It's just that productivity looks very different for a manual worker versus a knowledge worker. It will look very different for an expert or a novice. Do you need to do things faster, or maybe it's not so much about becoming faster, but doing high value activities with those tools? So is it always, be faster the goal, or there's actually a quality trade-off that we need to consider? So you don't know these things until you try the tool in your organization, you test it, you put it into a safe, space, you do a pilot, you find your champions, you see how it works, and then you can start having conversations about scaling it. There are a bit more founded on, practical considerations, observable implications. We always try to do, field observation. Like one thing that we love to do, for example, when we are able to do small pilots, is diary studies. Ask people to use the tool for a month and record what tasks they're using it for. Where do they see a benefit when it's actually not saving them time, but making everything more complex because, as we were saying, the processes and the workflows are not designed for this one. So there must be readjustments in the entire workflows, of certain processes for this to actually get to the productivity that we expect. And again, a leader who is, 5 floor detached from the people using that tool can't know these things unless they're tried out, they're recorded, and then you can start designing, the tool and tailoring it to actually unlock that productivity. So I'd say this is a way, is just try it as safely as possible, especially in certain domains, when you can't, you have special guardrails that you need to put in place to ensure that this data are safe and private. But the only thing is this, like, try out and see how it works. I have been using Copilot for months now. I know there's certain things that it helps me with. I know there's certain things that it doesn't. And so the only way was to try it. So getting exposure, to that. I think that would be my, the only way to try to do innovation safely if they're, and in compliance right now.
Thank you. This is a very good advice in general. Just put the research in, as we like to say. Miriam, do you have something to add to that?
Sorry, I was answering to a question in the chat. So the question is, what should leaders do for productivity?
Okay. Sorry. I for a second you threw me off whether this is the question in the chat or whether this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the question is basically, do you have any advice on how we can remain flexible in the face of this change? Basically, any advice that you might have for the audience before we turn to the chat and see some of their questions.
Yeah. So I think I echo what Martina said, and I say, going back to what I was talking about a little earlier, that systems level thinking is very important. Like really thinking about, because it is very easy to fall into the slippery slope of trying to increase productivity without thinking how that increased productivity affects the rest of the system, the rest of the organization, the personal lives of people who are involved. Somebody wrote in the chat, if the productivity goes up, do I get paid more with less work, right? That's a, maybe they're saying it sarcastically, but that's a very valid question, right? Like, what does it mean for us? And the advice I have is keeping an open mind. I think on some panels, I'm asked, what are the skills that are important to learn in this day and age? And I think most of the time people expect me to say Python and LangChain and, all of these more technical things. But I think the most important thing to learn these days is learn how to learn because the things are changing literally every week. And if you don't know, if you're not on top of your game in terms of learning and adapting, then you're going to fall out of the trends very quickly and become irrelevant, right? So there is this, LinkedIn meme and social media meme that says, the lawyer with AI, the physician with AI will replace the one without, right? And that's just how it's going to be. Like, over all of our evolution, we've seen that people who pick up the more effective tools and use it to, move towards their objectives end up taking up more of the resources and drive the rest of the population to extinction. And that's unfortunately how it works. And you just have to be adaptable, figure out how to learn effectively. One of the things that I'm personally trying to teach myself is how to curate my information sources, for example, right? Because it is very easy to, scroll on social media and be like in the two minds of, oh my God, this is so exciting. Oh my God, we're gonna die like 2 days from now, sort of thing, right? So that's not helpful. Like you have to really be careful about who you're trusting and what you're trusting, because even if you trust a person, a source of information, not everything they're going to say is going to be reliable. A lot of the things that I said are probably going to be unreliable, right? So you just have to learn how to learn and how to validate the information, because otherwise we're going to be in for a very rude awakening.
And even if you are reliable now, watching this panel discussion, like, in 6 months, let's say, might bring some very different perspective. This was actually the Darwinism I didn't expect to meet on this panel, but yeah, adaptability has always been somewhat of a key to survival. And, fortunate or unfortunate, we are habits of creature, and this is a time that is challenging to all of us as humans. How do we get out of this habit of lacking habit and start feeling more comfortable with change? I think. Saskia, do you have any final words before we dive into the Q&A portion?
Yeah, maybe something that as soon as Amir said curate my sources, there was something else that clicked in my head, and that's really this what is truth? What is real? Am I even real? Maybe I'm already an AI and we don't know. And that becomes really challenging. It can potentially undermine our beliefs in institutions, in society. So it can have quite far-ranging consequences. And just the other day, during this workshop we gave, people mentioned that, yeah, so if I ask ChatGPT something, then it will give me a nice answer that sounds very nice. Whereas if I Google, I get like 20 options. And well, that's basically nice of search engines. It kind of shows you that there might be multiple answers or a point of view, and you don't just get a single answer that is well formulated. And we know that if something is formulated in a very eloquent way, you tend to believe it. And if you're only presented with one option, you're very likely to stay with that. And then somebody else responded with, well, nowadays we also have these references where, for example, Perplexity or whatever you, all the new LLMs, they also show where they got their information from, and they provide you with a link. But then the next question becomes, well, if you click on the link and you're being forwarded to a paper, a blog post, whatever, how can you know that that is true or not created? Maybe it has also been created by an AI. So you can get in this really tough question of what is the truth and how can we know? How can we rely on what we're seeing? Now it's so easy to synthesize everything and make it look like it's so real. So I think that's going to be a very big challenge for us the coming years.
So you bring a very, very good point here. And I think maybe we're starting to think more and more about this, but what we are facing right now really leaves us very vulnerable. And this vulnerability is not like we're really we're creatures of fragility, you know. Our mental models are being shaken by that. Our sense of self and our sense of purpose is being shaken by that. Like, am I real and who am I? Those might be questions that have been asked like since the 4th century before Christ or something, but we are still asking them today, and we're getting farther from the answer than people were back then. Just the world is getting very complex, and functioning in those very digital fields leaves us very vulnerable in the analog world, I think. And this is some sort of a recap also maybe of the first question that we have from the audience. And we're a bit running out of time, but maybe we can, all of you can give like a short maybe answer to that. Is it possible with the evolution of highly advanced AI models? Is it conceivable that we humans are unable to understand how these models reason or learn, and by extension leave us very vulnerable? It's a deep one. Amir, maybe you can start with this.
So the question is, the fact that we don't know how these systems work is going to leave us vulnerable. Well, the answer is yes. But what are we going to do about it? You know, the reality is that I get on an airplane and I have absolutely no idea. Like, yes, I know the physics of it, but how it actually takes me from A to B, I have no idea how it does it. I have no idea how many sensors there are on it, what data it is. I don't know how it is doing, but the reason that I trust it to not just randomly fall in the middle of the sky is that I trust the manufacturers and the standards that exist, and you know, whatever they have done that said, okay, this is fine, and the examples that has been shown for it, that it actually does, I don't know, 10 flights a month and it doesn't fall, right? Like the likelihood is very. So what I'm trying to do with this example is to say that what we have used traditionally is trusting the standards and trusting experts who come out and say, okay, this is safe to use, and these are the rules of usage. But now, unfortunately, even those who are building these systems can't say exactly how it works, right? You know, of course, they have a little more idea about what it does and how it does it, but you know, you can't really say, oh yeah, this goes from here to here, and therefore, like that sort of logical reasoning is out of the door. So to some extent, we just have to accept that that's what it is, because you know, the alternative is not using deep learning at all, and or you know, trying to complement it with other things that allow us to at least get some sense of what is going on, and understand how essentially as a species we have to adapt to this level of uncertainty that exists going forward. Is that vulnerable? Absolutely. I think vulnerability comes with any type of technology, but how we respond to it is probably going to be very crucial going forward. And a lot of the things we talked about on this panel, like adaptability, you know, looking for sources of truth and even defining what truth means, and figuring out how to, like, one of the things that we do, since, as I said, like a lot of the commercial work that we do is around business workflow automation, which theoretically should replace the work that humans do, and therefore humans become irrelevant in those workflows. But you know, a conversation very commonly we have with our clients is, okay, great, we are going to implement this for you, but can we also have a conversation about how the same tech can be used to re-skill these people to do something else, or re-skill them, upskill them to do something different, right? Or something more advanced, something more strategic or problem solving related, right? So those are the types of conversations that need to start happening sooner than later, because that's the only reaction that we have to the fact that, yes, we don't know how they're doing whatever it is that they're doing.
Yeah, that was a very honest answer, really, and I enjoyed the analogy quite a lot. Yeah, maybe same things with electricity. Most of us are users of electricity without really knowing how it works, but we do benefit from having lights at dark hours. And yeah, um, are we going to get paid more using this tech? Someone is asking for a friend. Maybe I don't know. Who would like to answer this question? Saskia, maybe?
I
Are we
nominate Martina.
okay? Please do. Listen to Amir. He knows what he's talking about.
What was the question? I think it's in the QA. Was this?
Yeah. As we get more productive using this tech, are we going to get paid more? Asking for a friend.
Well, there was, a couple of years ago, even before the, LLM hype, reached the peak that it is now, there were conversation happening because here we're an innovation center. We like to provoke the imagination of people coming here, of thinking of different futures for good and, positive and negative outcomes and consequences, intended and unintended consequences of the choice we make today. And a few years ago, there was this sense of automation, and somebody said, it was an expert actually, he said, well, of course, if we will all get replaced by robots and AI, then we will have to implement universal basic income because you don't need to pay, robots. So we should just reallocate, profit to the people. And, universal basic income was a big conversation, 5-6 years ago, before COVID. So, those provocations are always out there. If you are more productive in terms of you will do stuff faster, I don't know if your boss will be able, if you just stay there and watch Netflix, or will they ask you to do more work instead. I think it's about more or less work. It's about different kinds of jobs, and this has a good side of it and a bad side. The good side means that, like, of course we can automate certain processes. We can remove some stuff that maybe it's tedious or boring or not high value in your workday, and that's going to be potentially good, like we have again, washing machines that do our laundry for us. That's a good, innovation. We don't want to go and do them manually, so certain tasks will be automated and that might be good. The interesting aspect there, I'm going to give you a metaphor. So right now, if you want to build a house by yourself, you can do the painting, you can build the foundations, you can do the interior design and all of that. If you start having AI agents, LLMs, robots doing that for you, that means that you can upskill yourself to become a space designer or an architect, because you don't need necessarily to be doing the job. Somebody else can do that for you, a machine potentially. Again, this is the good part of, you can upskill, you can train yourself into doing something different, higher value activities. The downside is, what happens if the robots doesn't work, or all of a sudden the machine stops? Is there anybody out there that's able to go back and put foundations, or are we just going to get stuck because nobody has the skill set to actually go back and do the basic kind of work? And I'm not saying basic as in simple. I mean, it's something about having a systems approach, as Amir was saying, and think about resilience of systems. If we rely too much on machines for critical parts of the job, if there is a machine failure, which might as well happen for whatever reason, then are we able to have people that can quickly pivot and take on their hands and have the skills to do what the machine was, able to do first? This is a very interesting thing in terms of understanding, yes, we can pick up new skills, yes, we can do higher value job. And it ties back into some of the conversations that people were having in the chat here about using it as an expert in your own domain versus using it to learn other things, right? We don't know, like, the reality is, this is new, we don't know the effects of AI on memory retention and memory recalling. That's the fact that you don't write an email means that in a week you don't even remember having read that email at all because you had somebody else writing it for you. That's the fact that you are going through the process quickly of getting a summary or an answer, mean that then you lose the critical ability to do that synthesis project, in your brain, to be able to recall information, so to go to, second order thinking. These things we don't know. That's why, like, psychologists, a lot of universities especially are studying this because it's very new. So what is that we risk losing of our humanness and our capacity and human skills that we can't afford losing it for the sake of, efficiency or getting there quicker or easier? This is stuff that I think we don't have answers, but the long-term thinking and the system thinking must make sure that we consider those things. What is that it's human that we want to retain, and how can we design AI in a way that allows us to retain that component of the work, of the skills, and not others, for example. So this is I think a very interesting conversation.
Very interesting conversation and a very nice, topic for a future panel as well. Like in terms of education, there have been a lot of papers coming up that actually state that we are not doing so great with retention after like those few years with ChatGPT, and we're not doing very good with critical thinking anymore. And I used to function in the world of cybersecurity before I came into data science, and we have started to talk there about over-reliance on AI as a security risk, which is, I think, very, very interesting aspect that we don't often think about. And what does it mean if at one point we can rely on it, and on the other, like in the next moment, we can't. Saskia, you have the option to choose your question now. Would you like to answer a question on the EU AI Act and how one can be compliant, or would you prefer to answer a question on how can people become involved internationally in terms of AI research and AI regulations? Which one do you prefer?
Oh, that's a tough one, but I would say perhaps how can people get more involved? That's kind of looking forward, right? Because what I see with all the rules and regulations, we can have very lengthy discussions about them and how they are complicated and how they are hindering our progress, etc., etc. But if we get involved, then that can be as simple as trying to build a product with these new tools. Think of new ways to integrate it. Think of ways to perhaps build in some safeguards, develop standards, increase trust. Because if we really want to use these technologies for our own good, we need to be able to use them, trust them, and actually build something that has value. So maybe it's not just a productivity gain, because if everybody's starting to produce more, then we're also not going to be competitive. And we really need to come up with new products, new ideas, new things. And I think that would be a very good direction for us to take, and not just think about how can we do research into it or how can we better understand the rules and regulations. No, but what are the opportunities for us here? What are we good at, and how are we going to create something new and better? And will we get more money if we're more productive? Well, not if the rest of the world is coming up with even new things. If it frees up some extra time and other parties are using that free time to come up with new great ideas or new great products, then we're going to lag behind still. So it is really, really important to get involved by really trying to make something new, create something, really add value. And that could also be adding value in terms of, for example, the education system. How can we educate people to be more adaptable, more robust? And I'm not that worried about losing touch with our human side, or that our memory will be worse. I mean, I think these concerns were also there when we started to use computers, when we started to use mobile phones. I'm pretty sure they had these conversations when people were discussing learning how to write, or should the masses also be able to read and write? Yes, there's definitely downsides to it. And yes, we are losing touch. There is a reason that people are sometimes looking into spirituality, for example, because they feel like there's something lacking. But human connection in the end is a really crucial one. So when it comes to doing research or looking for new opportunities, really think also about how we can increase connectedness with each other. because that will be, I think, a winning strategy.
This is a very, very nice note to end our conversation with. Maybe just to wrap up, if you want to get involved, we're going to leave the contacts of the panelists as well as ours. Get in touch with us. All of us have a lot of initiatives that would allow you to get in touch more with international work on AI. If you have any questions or we couldn't answer all of your questions, please, you will receive a feedback form in your emails as well as some resources based on this talk. Feel free to submit your questions in this feedback form. We are going to be happy to write an article on them. Maybe we can collaborate as well on an article with the panelists. This would be very interesting. Follow us on Substack. We do a lot of writing there, and we touch on a lot of questions, and we are planning to do more writing there as well. Today we discussed too many things to be able to wrap them up so simply, so we will be following up with all of you on the next days. I would like to thank all of you who stuck here until the end for your lovely discussions in the chat. It was so nice to see you all interacting with each other. I think we had so interesting, such an interesting discussion and so little time to be able to go through all of what we wanted to say. I really want to take a moment to thank our panelists for being here. It is such an amazing thing to listen to all of your insights, and I think the conversation today was very honest, very organic, and very. I hope you had as much fun as I had. I was having such a blast, and like this is the highlight of my week for sure. Thank you so much for being here, for agreeing, and for the flexibility to organize this panel. I hope we can have you on board for another one to continue on this discussion in the future. And yeah, this is all for me. We'll be in touch with all of you, and thank you.